Hello, everyone. This is Grace Choi, and I am streaming in from New York City in Queens. I'm really excited about today's panel about tapping into the Asian American and Pacific Islander vote, also known as AAPI for Asian American Pacific Islander. I'm here today with a couple of really good friends of mine. So it's just going to be a conversation. Y'all chime in with questions, comments throughout the next hour. We are going to do intros. Then I'll do a moderated Q&A for about 35 minutes. Then we'll open it up for audience Q&A. So I hope you are excited on a Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Yay! And if you're streaming in from California, wow, kudos to you because it's 7 a.m. And we thank Tim Fan, our tech moderator, for streaming in at 7 a.m. California. So let me go ahead and introduce our panelists. Julia Chun Kim is the current chief of staff to State Senator Favola in our favorite swing state, Virginia. She previously headed up a tech business in Singapore called Bitsy and was the chief of staff to State Delegate Mark Keem, who was the first Asian American delegate in Virginia State House. And she and I had the pleasure of serving as the national co-chair for Korean Americans for Biden. And we also co-founded KFO Fund, which is a Korean American Democratic PAC. So, you know, Julia's cool. She's also a mother. You may hear some fun noises in the background from her son. But she's good people. So really glad to have you here, Julia. And we have here Eric Salcedo. Is that how you say it, Eric? Salcedo?
Perfect.
Okay, I never say your last name. I just call you Eric. So Eric is currently the Democratic National Committee's Asian American Pacific Islander Coalition Director. He was previously the Midwest Regional Coalition Director for the Biden presidential campaign, was on the Biden-Harris transition team, and previously was a National Field Director of Asian Pacific Islander American Vote, which is one of the oldest national API civics organization based in Washington, D.C. And, you know, a lot more interesting stuff there too. But Eric is also a really good friend. Got to know him pretty well from his time at the API vote, and especially in the past midterm election and presidential election. And Eric, you're in Jersey, right?
Mm-hmm. Right across the river.
Dirty Jersey. That's what New Yorkers say. But I love you, Eric. And then we have Pallavi. Pallavi Prukayashta. Is that how you say it?
That was really close. It's Prakashta.
Oh, Prakashta. So sorry, Prakashta. Pallavi is a Democratic strategist in our beloved swing state of Virginia. I'm also from the ATL, Georgia. Sorry, Georgia. I'm so sorry. Why did I say Virginia? I'm looking at Julia and saying Virginia. Our beloved swing state, Georgia, where I'm from. No, I'm not from Virginia. And she has been, she started her career volunteering for Michelle Nunn's Senate campaign. She worked for the DPG, Democratic Party of Georgia. So she paved the way for me because I worked in the Democratic Party of Georgia for Stacey Abrams in 2018 as her AAPI outreach director. But then Pallavi went ahead and was not only a legislative aide in the Georgia State House, but she also founded a PAC called the Red Clay Democrats. She's the chair of it. She's also a DNC member for Georgia. And she's led and flipped several state house seats in Georgia for Democrats. And so Actually, one of the fun things we did in 2018 was this chai and chat event, just highlighting the Asian American political campaign staff on the Abrams team and in the Democratic apparatus in Georgia. And it was just like, it was hosted by our friend Anjali and Jetty, who is a badass South Asian woman in the South as well. And she literally served like the best chai, just like Indian treats I've ever had. So hopefully we can do that again in Georgia for the midterm elections too. But really excited to have all of you here. Before we go into the panel conversation, this conversation really is, I'm glad you're here, and it really came out of looking at the past couple of cycles. But I felt like, especially in this kind of sad state that the Asian American community has been experiencing racism because of the scapegoating of COVID-19 and the violence that continues, unfortunately, and most recently in Philadelphia, an elderly Chinese man who was shot dead in front of an elementary school. And I think people started paying more attention to the Asian American Pacific Islander community beyond just operatives like us. I think we also saw that Asian Americans became more civically engaged and louder in the past 2 years since the violence has increased. And we saw a turning point that was really interesting, and probably we can diagnose this situation 10, 20 years later. But the March 16 Atlanta shootings, Paulavi and I know very well how much it hit our community in Georgia. And that also hit the entire country. That was kind of similar to the George Floyd moment for the Black community, the March 16 shooting of the women in Atlanta spas for the AAPI community. And through the tragedy, we've seen just a lot of people get really excited about mobilizing the community, getting civically engaged. And then also Democratic operatives and strategists like you all who are interested in learning more about the AAPI vote and seeing that our community is really the margin of victory to win in a lot of swing states and districts throughout the country. But far too many times our community has been taken for granted, even though in Georgia, the AAPI vote increased nearly 500% in the past couple cycles. And, looking ahead into the midterm elections, especially swing states, we're going to just have a little conversation with our friends about what can we do to strategize more effectively? What are we missing out on? What have we done wrong? So we're just going to have some real talk. And so I'm just going to start with an open question for you all, panelists. What have you seen in the past few cycles on the Asian American Pacific Islander voting trends? Anyone? Y'all go.
Well, I'll start with something generally that I noticed, which is I have noticed that the Republicans around the country are making a very concerted effort to court the AAPI vote. And that to me has been super troubling because I feel like, overall we've maintained, the Democrats have maintained and kind of done what we think is that we need to continue to do in order to keep that electorate on our side, but that's not enough. We have to continually be innovating, continually be reaching out in the ways that are appropriate to each of the communities. And sometimes I think we're falling short.
I'll agree with that. The good news is we've seen just this incredible increase of Asian Americans, and that didn't happen overnight. And here in Georgia, Stacey Abrams has kind of laid the foundation for that for the past 10 years, even though she only has been getting attention past maybe 2 or 3 years. We've seen an increased amount of strategic attention being given to our communities. There's in-language websites now. There's in-language voter lit now. At least the state party of Georgia, we have people who can talk to people on the voter protection hotline in I think like 5 or 6 different languages, many of which are Asian languages. So there are things that we're doing correctly, and we should be proud of that, but we should also be able to build on that. What's been troubling to me is that other than white Americans, Trump got a bigger share of every other minority demographic in 2020 than he did in 2016. That means even with everything that he stands for, just all the vile comments he's made, the very overtly racist things he has done to affect our communities, even with all of that, there's something missing where people in our community are still voting for people like him and voting for values that he stands for. And I think instead of, it's great being a big tent party, but at the same time, we need to be able to diagnose why that is and fix it before the next midterms, or we might lose the House.
Mm-hmm. I'll just wrap this question with agreeing with both Julia and Pallavi. Every election cycle, AAPIs have made history with historic turnout, increasing our turnout every cycle. And the level of engagement, while that's always been I think a sticking point with the community that comes out in some of the national surveys about who's being engaged, it's increased. But it's also increased both on the Democratic and the Republican side. And, like was said earlier, we need to adapt and improve and innovate our tactics because the Republicans have caught on to our playbook, right? And they're there early on the ground. They're doing in-language, paid media in-language misinformation, which we'll get to later. And, I think between Virginia and New Jersey and the 2020 cycle, we've seen the split between Democrat, Republican voting around like 65-30, Democrat, Republican. So in my mind, that is kind of like the hard floor, the hard ceiling, right? That we need to make sure that our vote share of the AAPIs stays at least 65%, and that the vote share of Republicans stay below 30%, but they're making inroads. And I think the key is to figure out where are the soft spots in the API community, right? Because we're not a monolith. We vary not just ethnically, but I've realized now even more so the last 2 cycles regionally and state specific wise. So who are the specific communities in these states that we need to message and persuade to stay in our blue column?
Yeah, no, I think we should definitely talk through about some of the tactics that Pallavi mentioned that the Republicans are doing. What are the tactics Democrats are doing that we can do better? And I think, I think there's a lot to be learned there. And you're right, Eric, about the voting share is gradually shifting more to Republicans, but really comes down to who's making an effort, who's putting the resources, the staff, the media buys, really trying to understand what gets the community's attention. So even the messaging, the issues that are shared, I think all of that plays a role on the GOP strategy side that has helped to make more inroads there. I guess, Julia, I know last year's cycle, we saw in the Korean community that there was misinformation in Kakao Talk, and Kakao Talk, which is a Korean, kind of like WeChat social media platform. And there was GOP ads bought in local Korean newspapers and Chinese newspapers But we saw in our own friends and relative circle that there is messaging on public safety, kind of fear tactics on public safety, and then the economy and what they will lose out on. And it was pretty professional the way these ads were done. And you saw them every day in the Korean newspaper. So they were buying these ads and being very strategic. So can you chat a little bit about that, and what the heck do we do about that? Not only in the Korean community, but also just misinformation, and then also just like the investment that the other side is doing into our communities in the way that we are starting to do more of, like Eric said, but there's still more work to be done.
So what I have been so impressed with when it comes to the Republicans and their messaging and investment is that it has been through every channel. They have not missed a beat. It has been through social media, across platforms, traditional media, in the form of through media channels that are specific to communities, in language, peddling a very specific message to each community and age group. It is very professional, and we better board. And we have done that in the past. We've done it, we did it during President Biden's, then candidate Biden's run for president. We did it during the Obama years, but it's not consistent, especially when we get to the races that are, in the states. So that's one of the things that I was going to talk about later on when we talk about what happened in Virginia. But, purveyors of misinformation, they're doing so very smartly, and they're targeting communities very specifically based on the how primed they are to receive certain messaging. So for instance, if a community has a history of a certain type of migration or communism in their histories, they will prime messages that will really break through and get through to them in language in a very appropriate way through YouTube. And what do we do about it? We have to be consistent in our messaging across all platforms in language, and it's not happening. And for that to happen, we need investment into communications and investment into staff. It's very simple.
Yes, definitely. Pallavi, Eric, any other thoughts on that, on misinformation and our counter strategy around that for our communities?
Yeah, when it comes to the misinformation campaigns that are done, and misinformation is just, let's just call it what it is. They're blatant lies that they put out on social media. I've been kicking myself the last year because for years, and I'm not sure if any of my family's listening, but I've always taken myself out of like the family, WhatsApp chats and Facebook chats, because they're just sending each other like, I don't want to say anything, right? So I took myself out, and now I'm realizing I should have stayed in, because this is where misinformation is how it's conveyed, right? And so that's the tricky thing, is like it's on the social media channel, like on the YouTubes and such, but it's also on these messaging apps like WhatsApp, Kakao Talk, WeChat, that it's harder for us to have immediate eyes on, but it can still flourish very rapidly. So we need to, I think, train and equip our volunteers to push out and create in language materials, right? Because for us to do it, it would take a while, right? Whereas I think the beauty of the simplification of their process is that anyone can make it, and it's like the more hokey the graphic looks, the more effective it is. So I think we have to do that. Also, I think, though, going back to Julia's point in terms of where we need investment, it's figuring out, what is the message, the most impactful message for each group, right? And the only way we can do that is with more survey data. And, I'm happy, that we'll have more of that this cycle. But as we know, in previous cycles, our community is lucky if we get one or two public surveys in a presidential cycle, let alone in a midterm cycle. So we're already way ahead of the game in terms of that, because the Morning Consult poll had one about a month or so ago, and talking about the long-term effects of Trump's anti-Asian rhetoric, and how AAPIs have remembered that. So I think when we talk about messaging, While the 21 cycle, the story is, oh, voters are thinking of what have you done for me lately, right? They want to know something. What have we done for them lately, and don't talk about the past. For APIs, I think if you remind them, hey, Democrats stood by your side and stood up for you during this anti-Asian rhetoric from the president, Trump, and the Republicans were silent, and their silence was their consent. And we need to hammer that point home in 22.
So two things I want to mention. One, I completely agree with Julia about the way they're so strategic in their messaging, and they really zero in on the fear tactics. And a lot of that is racist. But the thing is, our response to that almost always ends at, well, that's racist, and we stop there. I was campaign manager for Angelica Couch up in Johnston here in Georgia. We flipped a Trump district in 2018. She won by 317 votes. It was a razor thin margin. And then in 2020, she won, I think, about 54%. In that same area this year in our municipals, every single Democrat running lost. And it was because the Republicans put out their Atlanta crime is going to come to our nice little bedroom suburban place. They're going to bring apartments, which we know is code. They're going to bring street racing, which we know is code. But the thing is, and I've been guilty of it too, within our political operative bubble, we know something is racist and we know something is dog whistling, but we did not successfully, because my candidate also lost. We cannot successfully tell people, hey, it's not true, and they're going after your fears based on X, Y, and Z. We have not been good at hitting tactics. And my parents have a neighbor who voted for Stacey Abrams and voted for every single Democrat down the ballot, had a Biden sign up, texted me saying, I'm voting Republican this year because we almost got mugged, and I feel like the Democrats care more about criminals than they care about police officers and getting crime under control. And I know that's not true, but somehow this man who has been a Democrat for the majority of his life has now bought into that story of Democrats don't care about crime. And that's what we have to hit back on. We have to be consistent with our messaging, and we have to kind of have a next step for, okay, we know something is a dog whistle, we know something is racist, but how do we tell our entire community that and make them understand that? Because a lot of times our actions and that we just feel great about ourselves because we recognize racism, and we're not going to do that. That's a fault. The other thing is being able to talk to different communities in a language they understand, right? So give me 1 second while I change my mic back. I apologize. My computer, right after the elections, decided it was done. My mouse doesn't work. My mic is being weird.
I think a computer needs some self-care too, like all of us.
It went through the 2018 cycle here, so I love this thing. But for a lot, even having this AAPI thing, right? How many Asian Americans actually understand what AAPI stands for? So when we say we're doing this event for AAPIs, if our parents and our grandparents and our parents' friends don't even understand that this event is for them, we have lost already because we've missed out on what our audience is. So I think a lot of times there is that kind of divide between first and second generation immigrants. I can talk about POC and all these other acronyms that just the way all of us can. But when I start talking to my parents about these terms, I can see just this, complete, they don't understand what I'm saying. So I have to first tell them what the acronym stands for, and then tell them how they're part of that group. So there's a divide between our first and second generation immigration class, because there are people who are not proficient in English. There are people who might not be proficient in kind of the words we use. Like, it's very academic the way we talk about certain things. And I think we don't always understand that we have to make the messaging a lot more clear to people in a certain community based on what language looks like for them. So instead of coming at people with like, well, for the POC community, and they don't even understand that they're part of that, we need to be, I guess, humble ourselves a little bit more and make sure instead of talking at people, we're talking with people in our communities to bring forth the messaging that they need to hear.
Oh, I love that. Talking with people, not talking at people. That is the Pallavi quote of the day, I have to
love
say.
Oh, hey, what's up, buddy?
Hi.
This is Ethan. It's funny because I totally agree, Pallavi. We have to meet people where they're at, and this is someone who used to be very like, we must have proper use of the acronym. It's no longer APA or AA or API. It's AAPI, but in every state it's different, and we just have to meet folks where they're at. Like if they want to call themselves Asian Pacific Americans, I'm not going to be mad at them. I'll be like, well, it's a little dated, but or if they want to call them Asian Pacific Islanders Americans, I'm like, okay, that's a little, Pacific, it's like saying Puerto Rican American, but okay. But we have to meet them where they're at. I'm not going to be, draconian about the letters anymore.
It's AAPNHI now.
Oh, AANHPI, right? Yeah, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander. The White House, the White House just announced their new initiative.
We're not a monolith. I mean, there's absolutely a divide between East Asians and South Asians. There just is. There's not a one language that brings us together. There's not a one religion or one food. So it's just such a diverse community that even trying to put everybody under one umbrella comes with challenges, and it's challenges we can meet. We just have to recognize them first.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that because I think that's why, meeting the community where they're at. We mentioned at the beginning of the intro about the chai and chat conversation event that we had to recruit more volunteers. It wasn't a what do you call it, voter engagement, like phone banking, canvassing event, because we knew that we needed to first meet the community where they're at. And our community loves food. And so when you say there's going to be some chai and some chat, they're going to come out and show up, right? They want to be together surrounded at the table with food. And then when it's hosted by a friend of theirs that looks like them, and then there are people on the panel who look like them, not me, but Pallavi, who people are more excited about. That's really also, meeting people where they're at. And I think when, I think we had another event where Feroza Saeed, who had a curry and canvassing event. And so she just made this amazing spread of different types of curries. And like, the South Asian community came through and people wanted to canvass in order to eat her curry. So all that to say, the AAPI, AANHPI, these acronyms aren't going to make sense. But when you talk about things that are culturally appropriate and resonate with the community, and activities that resonate with them, then people are more willing to engage in these political names. Like canvassing doesn't make sense. Phone banking, what is that? I'm not going to a bank, and why are you asking about my phone? Like, it doesn't make sense to non-political operatives that are not like us. We had to stop like lonkifying it and politicizing words. Like, we need to talk like normal human beings, because no one talks like this.
I think that's where the entire elitist label comes from too. These like super cute names, like this is going on, this is going on, and to an average person doesn't need anything. We just kind of, it's again we're talking at them a lot of times.
Yeah, exactly. Some other points that I'm also hearing that I loved is just kind of summarizing this piece of the conversation was hokey graphics by the community work. Put it on WhatsApp, Kakao Talk, WeChat, Line, Facebook Messenger.
I think that's been backed by research as well, that the more homemade these things look, the more they break through.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So it's pretty amazing, which means that we all can be advocates, and we all, we can all make a meme. Come on.
Yeah. Well, that too. But to your point, Julie, the other thing I was going to bring in is hokey graphics work, and Julia pointed out it's backed up by research, but the hokey graphics and the community need to be invested in with real dollars. So you had mentioned, Julia, about comms, investing in comms people, as well as just comm strategy and media buys, but also um, uh, staff, right? So pay your volunteers if you can, especially if they're going to make a hokey graphic. And then pay translation services. I think people ask for free translation all the time, and that's just not fair. It takes a lot of work for people to write culturally appropriate translated material, and usually it's by experts. Like, it's not fair that we don't pay our volunteers and then don't expect the campaign to pay for these specialized services. And then you all also mentioned survey data in order to get a sense of what the community needs. And the last thing I'll mention is consistent messaging. We need to be consistent in our messaging the way that the GOP is doing as well. Also tie in messaging that is lacking on our side, like public safety. Because public safety, especially with the violence that has gone up towards our community, the real fear, as well as overall the violence in many of our communities have gone up because of COVID-19, right? Businesses have shuttered down, unemployment has risen. Even if some of the data points to a growth in employment in our communities, we have been hit really hard. And then mental illness has gotten a lot worse, and it's led to more crime. And so when Eric Adams, for example, in New York as a Democrat, ran on mostly a public safety platform, and so did Bruce Harrell in Seattle. I mean, I thought that was just really interesting that the moderate Democrats who are Black, Bruce being Black and Asian, really focus on public safety, and that resonated with not only moderate or independent voters or moderate Republicans, but Democrats as well. So, and that, as we know, resonates with our own communities when we have these conversations. So let's not forget that for our own strategy. All right, I'm going to go into specific questions, more specific ones. Pallavi, really exciting that Stacey Abrams just announced her run for governor of Georgia. Woo! Yay! So exciting. What does this mean for the Asian American Pacific Islander vote? What did we learn from 2018, 2020, and what do we need to do for this upcoming midterm election?
I am so damn excited about Stacey Abrams running. There was kind of this like tension here because she hadn't announced, and we were just kind of like, she won't do it. And then there were all these rumors circulating about how she wasn't going to run, and I was like, please don't break my heart. But yeah, it's very exciting. I think part of the reason I'm so excited about this, just not just as a Georgia citizen, but as an operative, is having Reverend Warnock and Stacey Abrams on our ticket is going to just naturally create that buzz and create that excitement. And it's going to make it easier for us to get out the vote, because she has been, and I keep saying this over and over again, she's been doing this work for over a decade. This is not an overnight phenomenon. She's not an overnight phenomenon. She has put in the work and the dollars and the manpower and the woman power for a lot of years. So seeing all of that gain momentum and just kind of capitalizing on everything she's done is very exciting to be a Democratic operative in the state of Georgia in 2022. In terms of AAPI turnout, Stacey Abrams is somebody who has been talking to and including members of her community since she was a state house member. I have talked to Indian American business leaders who I would think would be Republican, who speak so highly of her, because when everybody was ignoring Asian Americans, she was not. She was having those one-on-one meetings with them. She was bringing them into events, and she was attending events. And it's really great to hear those personal stories of somebody say, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when my business wasn't as big as it is today, Stacey Abrams was still showing up to my events.
Oh, I'm getting chills,
I know. She has just done such an incredible job of building relations and maintaining them and doing it without any kind of fanfare. Now there are cameras on her 24/7, but she's been doing the work. She's been doing the work before it was sexy. And I just really, really appreciate seeing somebody who, has an accent like my parents do and have a story like my parents do come out and tell me, well, Stacey talked to me like 8 years ago when nobody else did. So those stories mean a lot. And I know they're anecdotal, but she has done such an incredible job of making sure that people who look like us and who, might not always want to speak up because they're a little bit embarrassed of how they sound like, their English is not as great as everybody else's, and making them feel human and making them feel like they have ownership of our party. It's just a really beautiful thing. So I am absolutely looking forward to seeing that kind of come out again. I'm really excited for elections next year. It's still next year. I have to check the date to make sure we're still in December.
Yeah, I know. We're almost there.
Right?
20 days left. And Paula, we also have a friend, B. Wynn. You want to talk about her race for Secretary of State and what that means for Georgians and for Asians?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be an interesting race for sure. That's a race I believe she's in, and there are 2 or 3 other Black men in. So I'm just really interested to see what each of them kind of bring to the table, and I'm excited for those debates. And we know there are people who have been looking at elections in Georgia for a really long time. So I'm just excited to see what that debate sounds like.
Yeah. Very exciting stuff happening in Georgia. In 2018, I think I mentioned in the beginning that I was the Asian American Outreach Director for Stacey, and that's how I got to meet people like Pallavi. And I was impressed by her political team. I had not seen this in any other campaign I've worked with since 2006. And we had a veterans outreach person, LGBT women, seniors. We had Asian American, Latinx, Black. We had people reaching out specifically to Black sororities and Black fraternities, because that's a big voting bloc and volunteer base in Georgia as well, with Morehouse and Spelman. And then I'm forgetting some folks. Did I say LGBTQ already? But it was just it was the most well thought out, diverse coalitions team I had ever seen. And I saw that on the Biden presidential campaign, he also did that. But when I was in the 2012 Obama presidential campaign, it was not that inclusive. So I think we've come a long way, even in just a few presidential cycles ago. But Stacey had, like you said, Pallavi, had been doing this work on the ground for over a decade. And it was natural for her to hire a very, very diverse team. It was the most diverse Democratic team I've ever been on. There are over 60% of Black campaign staffers, which when we look at the Democratic campaign operative and infrastructure, is mostly white. And it makes sense because people like us, it's really hard to get into. Our parents are like, why would you go into this type of job when you're out of a job every cycle and your candidate might not win? Like, why would you do something so unstable when we came to give you a good life in the US? So I think it's really interesting that for Stacey, she was very intentional. She hired people who look like her mostly. And side note, I learned a lot about Black culture that I will always take with me, and I'm still learning. But that was it really felt like a family. I felt like I was joining this amazing community and family. And then Julia, I want to talk about a sore spot. I know it might be a little too soon, so you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but we saw what happened on the week of election day in November, and the devastating loss that was surprising in Virginia. McCullough, not quite coming through. What went wrong there, and what could we have done better? Because
So Yeah, so I mean, what's interesting is we have decades-long history of the governor always being the opposite party of the president in office. So if we have a Democrat as the president, then Virginians have always voted in a Republican to the governor's mansion. The only one time in the past nearly over 40 years this ever happened was the last time Terry McAuliffe was governor. He was the one person to break that trend, and so he rode on that. You know, Terry as a person, he's very smart, he's very inclusive, he's great businessman, he's got an incredible history, he's got a lot going for him. So personally, if you know him, it is to love him. And I helped on his campaign, but you know what, that campaign could have been run a lot better. And I'll tell you, I keep harping on this, but talent, we needed some better talent, and part of that is not his fault. Virginians are exhausted because we have elections every single darn November. There is an election, and it is always the election that is the election of your lifetime. Always, everyone from the local elections to the state elections to the presidential. It's always so huge. People are tapped out and they're tired. And talent, they were just exhausted, and so it was hard to find really good, experienced talent on the side of communication, like outreach and policy. What I didn't really see was I saw very talented people, but who didn't have the right mix of skills, who understood from a policy and outreach perspective what it meant and the importance of reaching out to the AAPI community and how to do it well. And also, I didn't see a lot of their staff, their campaign staff advocating on behalf of the community. So let me just tell folks who are on this conference now listening in that if you are hired to be staff on a campaign, yes, you are paid by the campaign, you are an employee of the campaign, and so you've got to do what the campaign says and all the things that come with that. But also part of your job is to advocate for the community to the campaign, because the candidate and all the people who surround the candidate, sometimes they've got a lot going on, and you need to be able to break through and say, you know what, I need to advocate for the Black. If you're the Black outreach person, or if you're the API outreach person, you need to say the community needs this, the community needs these ad buys, the community needs your one pager to hear what your platform is specific to their community and the vision that you have, and you have to have it in language. You have to not only be an employee of the campaign, but you have to be an advocate of the community to the campaign.
Amen.
Otherwise, yes,
Amen.
otherwise nothing's going to happen. And so I think that was one of the things that was missing. And just overall, the Youngkin, who was Terry's opponent, he just ran a very good campaign. He reached out to the API community early in language and through trusted surrogates. He did it early. He did it way before we were even thinking about it, and we're like, whoa. And then we alerted the campaign, and it didn't happen. Things didn't happen as quickly as maybe they could have or should have. So he just ran a very good campaign, and there were issues surrounding the campaign that we could not break through. Education was so important, on so many levels. Like, what are my kids in the K through 12 curriculum being taught, and how are they being taught those things? Do my kids have access to the magnet schools where they're like basically feeders to UVA and the Ivies? Do my kids have proper access? Are you going to take away the entrance exam? How are they getting access? And do they have resources once they get in? And then higher education. Do we have financial access to higher ed? Or are we going to be discriminated against because of the model minority myth? So education was huge, and we didn't do enough to present an image.
Yeah. No, that's real. That's also true in New York City. We saw that in the mayoral race here. I don't know if you saw the article, but Curtis Sliwa, the Republican candidate for mayor, against Eric Adams, the Democratic candidate for mayor in New York City, he did early outreach to the Chinese community in Queens in language, got surrogates, exactly what you were saying Youngkin did. And I was like, are you kidding me? He actually flipped Democratic city council seats to become Republican in a Democratic city like New York City. because you know what you got to do? You just got to talk to our community in their language. Then they'll be like, you care? You actually care? You're actually investing in us? I mean, it's so simple. And luckily and unluckily, I don't know what it is, but to buy ethnic media ads is so cheap. When I heard how much the state party, the Democratic State Party in Georgia was spending on TV ads, radio ads, print, the budget was ginormous. And I was like, oh, just need like $100,000 or $50,000 to do media, radio every single day in all the different languages and print every single day in all different, print. And I was just, and they were like, that's it? That's all it costs? I'm like, yeah, you should have been doing this for 6 months or a year. So sorry, I'm a little bit frustrated, and I think all my friends here are as well. Is just invest early in our communities, in your dollars, your staff, and also your communications media buys. Okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox, but to Eric,
I think you're totally right. I'm sorry. I know you have another question you want to get to, but I think you're totally right because we need to, it's how do we reach and message our community the most effective? And the way they're doing it is not rocket science. They're picking the lowest hanging fruit. Like, oh, okay, yeah, it's like set up these like regular ads, right? And we'll put some things out there like CRT that folks are. They know it's going to put us on the back foot because as Democrats, we always feel like we need to address whatever they put out there. Like, oh, let's talk about critical race. Like, no. Let's pivot as quickly as possible. And why are Republicans all of a sudden the party of education when they're usually ones that are trying to, cut funding to schools, right? And so, like, how do we pivot back to that versus talking about this esoteric, law school type of theory and education?
Exactly what you said. When we're talking about campaigning and reaching out to voters, they're allowed to do everything they're doing. We can't complain because they're playing the game better than us. We just have to play the game better than them. So when I hear people, be upset at all the campaigning, and we should be doing the same thing. We should not be spreading misinformation, but we should be able to understand that they're allowed to campaign just the way we're allowed to campaign. And we should have a plan for when they do the shady stuff they do, instead of just complaining that they're doing it.
Oh, absolutely.
And I don't think we have a plan all the time. And even with the CRT thing, this came up a lot in my municipal race in Johns Creek. We had a slate of the Democrats were, other than one person, were mostly Black. And that became just a sticking point of I would go to houses where somebody had supported the councilman who was running for mayor, who's Black, and a police officer had voted for him into council, but was not voting for him for mayor because of CRT. Because, to quote this gentleman, "You will teach my kids that white people are bad." And I asked, "Is your kid, what law school does your kid go to?" And he just gave me a completely blank look. And I said, "Well, CRT is about law school. It's not if you're a fifth grader." And he didn't like that answer. But the thing is, we have to be able to. The conversation surrounding CRT has become, well, they're going to teach my kids that white people are bad.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our parents, we have to admit, kind of subscribe to the model minority myth. They consider themselves the hardworking, educated people, and that's why they have made it in America. And because a lot of our parents haven't grown up here, they haven't fully learned in an educational setting the history of racism and the history of systemic racism in this country. So it's just not something that's really there when they're talking about issues like CRT. But I think when it gets brought up, which it will, and when public safety gets brought up, which it will in the next cycle, we need to be able to talk about the reality of it and talk about the fact that actually CRT is not taught to your fifth grader, but it's almost a non-issue because if you really care about education, this is what, and you're completely right, we need to pivot. But I do think we need to address that concern because I think there's somewhat of a gap there where we say, okay, yeah, that doesn't matter. Let's talk about what I actually want to talk about. We're maybe losing people who now are subscribing to everything the Republicans are telling them about
Yeah.
education.
No, I agree with that, Pallavi. And it sounds like we have a strategist here is offering to lend her advice if you're willing to pay her the price um, on education policy messaging from the Democratic Party. I'm noticing the time. I want to make sure we get to other questions as well, including I see an audience question. But before that, Eric, I just want to hear a little bit more about your vantage point from being at the DNC, doing national Asian American outreach and coalition building. We saw Michelle Wu and Aftab Purvel, and then Bruce Harrell become, first time mayors who are Asian American, which is exciting on the municipal level, but we also see that there has been a lack of AAPI voter engagement from the Democrats. And so what can be done nationally? Is there a correlation around that? And yeah, what can be done nationally, especially looking into the midterms next year?
Yeah, I think from my vantage point at the DNC and having done, the nonpartisan voter engagement work on the API side as well, it's like seeing in the states like the different ingredients for success. Like I think Georgia, it checks off so many boxes in terms of you have the longtime C3 work that had been going on for years to do voter registration. You have an active C4 network that are pushing issues, getting APIs trained to vote on because of those issues. And then I think the capstone is on the partisan side. Seeing the staffing and the messaging and the outreach that takes place in places like in Boston and Cincinnati and in Seattle. I mean, those mayor elects, they're not, they didn't just pop out of nowhere. They've been doing this work for a long time, building up their organizations and their support and building the bridges, because they were elected in cities that don't have super large API populations. And I think that's one of the keys to being a successful API candidate is having knowing the community, knowing what it takes to build coalition within the API community, and then taking those lessons and how, and as APIs, we all know, the only way for us to succeed is to build coalition, because unless you live in a city or Orange County or something like that, where it's 50% plus API, it's going to be Hawaii. Yeah, right. It's going to be very difficult. I think in terms of the investment, we see it to different degrees, and sometimes campaigns need to be reminded about the best practices that I think for us we take for granted because we see it's up in our face every cycle in 18 and 20 and going back as far as 16 and 12, the increase. We need to keep on harping on that point. And going back to what Julia said earlier, what's not in the job description is that we fight for the community within the campaigns and within the party. I think I'm hopeful because in New Jersey, and now I got to shout out my home state, the Garden State. They had 3 API staff dedicated to API outreach, and I think. When the final numbers come out, I'm hopeful that it will show that APIs were one of the stalwarts that held up against the red tide that we saw. It kind of inundated us a little bit in Virginia, definitely on the statewide tickets, but down ballot, all the API candidates won their respective state delegate races. So is that right, Julie? Is it all, or I think yeah, we expanded the API caucus in the Virginia State House. So
we're actually launching officially the Virginia AAPI Legislative Caucus on the 16th. So a little plug there. I mean, check my social media for details, but it is official for the first time in history in Virginia.
APIs in Virginia.
And I got to shout out. Yeah.
Come on, New Jersey.
Oh, see, there's one. I got to shout out DAV, the Democratic Asian Americans of Virginia, which is the AAPI State Caucus, because they're the ones I think that really spearheaded the AAPI outreach and making sure down ballot races had materials in language. I was actually in Virginia the last 2 weekends before election day, doing outreach there, not realizing that maybe I should have stayed in New Jersey a little bit just in case.
Jersey was scary, man. We almost
Yeah.
lost that state. Sorry, you only have 4 minutes left. I want to get to one audience question. I'm going to just integrate it and make it kind of your last statement. What are you most worried and excited about heading into 2022 as it relates to the elections and Asian American vote? And say it in 1 minute. I know it's hard, but got to do it because we don't have much time. Pallavi? Looks like you're ready.
I am most excited about lessons learned from the past. I am most excited about the fact that we have noticed that when you wait until the last minute to talk to our communities, you lose. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of the campaigns, our state parties, our different caucuses, take those lessons and fix the mistakes and, carry on all the good things we've done. I'm just excited for the momentum. I think things are going, we've learned so much and we have the dollars now to really make the investments we need to make. I am worried about the fact that, Asian Americans are new Democratic voters. It wasn't until President Obama that Asian Americans were voting in the Democratic. So it's all of this is very new. And given the amount that Republicans have invested in our communities here in Georgia, they've opened up a Asian American Outreach Center in Gwinnett County, Georgia, which is maybe the most diverse counties in Georgia. They're it's a brick and mortar place that they're clearly putting dollars in it. And they're really good at recruiting. They build up candidates from scratch, and they have like this 5-year plan, and we scrambled the week of qualifying to find somebody to get into a seat. I think what I'm worried about is that we may not be recruiting as early and as strategically as we should be, and that we may not Asian Americans might be coming back to the Republicans if we don't take the threat of their messaging working.
Yeah, that's good. Eric?
Yeah, I am excited that once again we are going to see historic turnout of the API community, right? If that's one thing the trends are telling us, that we know it's going to increase. We know we're going to have more API candidates run for elected office than ever before.
Yes.
I'm super excited.
Staff hired.
Staff hires, right? I mean, that was kind of like my thing, telling people in the run up for 2020. I'm like, there are a lot of primary campaigns to jump on and get experience. This is great for our community, not ever realizing that I would be one of those people. I think the thing that makes me, I don't want to say nervous, but it's like, what's going to be different in this cycle is like, I think before we had always been, our primary focus was activating the API electorate for Democrats. Now it's like, now we have to fight for the API electorate with Republicans, right?
Yes.
And it's, I feel that we're up for the challenge.
Yes.
Right? They had their shots fired. They threw them down. They've claimed, we've been able to reach and persuade APIs to the Republican side, and in certain places and demographics they've succeeded to a degree, but it's not something that we can't fight for and persuade and get them back into our fold. And I think we know what it takes to do it. It's just how do we make sure we have the resources and the commitment to get it done.
Yeah, Eric, send the money to all of our states. Thanks. We thank you. We're gonna hold you accountable. JK, not JK.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? I think that's the community's job, is to hold us accountable, right?
Yes.
As representatives within these
and then you hold the DNC accountable to our community. We appreciate you and Belle. Julia?
Yeah, I was just writing notes because you all said so many good things, and I'm like, oh shoot. They took what I was going to say. But yes, it's true. We have more API electeds around the country. Super exciting. And I'm also excited that we're finally these issues that we cared about in the past are finally on the table in a real way, not a symbolic way. Like, oh, I'm going to talk about this. It's never going to pass. It's never going to be brought up. There's not going to be passable bills brought up by members who can actually get these through, not symbolic, but in a real way. Paid leave, maternal morbidity, let's talk about early family education, but especially the paid leave, because I'm like all about that. Super excited to let's address these issues. What am I worried about? On the flip side, we're also addressing issues that could seriously hurt our community in a real and not symbolic way. The whole abortion fight is terrifying, and it's coming your way if it hasn't already. And I'm also worried about the Republicans. They have really found their playbook, and not only on a national level, but state and local, they are adhering to that playbook with the most discipline. They're very disciplined, always on message, and they are hammering it hard. And not only with the AAPI community, but with the Latinx community, they're making huge inroads. And I'm very concerned that we do not have a similar playbook and party discipline and candidate discipline to really make sure that we don't lose the gains and momentum that we made in the past. So, hopefully we can pull it together.
Yeah, no, I think that is a good segue into, it sounds like we have a little bit more time, which is exciting because this can be a whole day conversation with our friends. But someone asked about, coalition building across different communities of color. And, Julia, you touched upon the kind of same tactics that are being done in order to persuade Latinx voters by the GOP. And so what does that look like in terms of coalition building, and what is effective? I think there was a specific question about Stacey Abrams, so maybe probably you and I can touch on that. But just generally speaking, what can we do for effective coalition building?
Yeah, was that a former? So I did see a question on like multiracial solidarity and that kind of thing, and you know what? Like, we need to show up. Our communities need to show up for each other. After the Atlanta shootings, that was just like that. I mean, I can't even describe how I felt after that. After like Freddie Gray, I can't describe to you how I felt after. It was horrifying and terrifying, and so many of these things. And what I noticed, especially after the Atlanta shootings, is when I was on social media and talking, having conversations with people, what I noticed people saying often, it wasn't just once in a while, was they didn't show up for us. This is not our fight. They've never shown up for us. We're not going to show up for them. And I saw that a lot. And I was like, we need to do a better job showing up for other communities, especially the Black community, especially the Latinx community, the LGBTQ community. We need to do a better job. Go to their marches, hold the signs, go to their meetings. Meetings are tough because people feel so uncomfortable. It's not a march, it's a place where you could actually be called on. So, but go to their meetings, have the conversations, and you need to show up for other communities so they feel the same draw to show up for you when you need it. So,
I'll say though, it was very heartening and inspiring to see so many AAPIs turn out during the racial justice protests after the George Floyd shooting. Throughout in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities, I saw so many young AAPIs out there, and right in the midst of the pandemic.
we
fighting
were
and
so
I'm sorry.
We were in masks. I think
we're masked, but
but people didn't know that we were there for them. We were there for you. We will always be there for you.
True.
Yeah, it's.
I mean, and that kind of goes along the lines of like how sometimes it's almost symbolic of how our experiences in these racial justice movements are marginalized and sometimes excluded. Like the reason why MLK is wearing a lei when he crosses the bridge is because it was given to him by someone from a Hawaiian person, and it's or we've been there. It just hasn't been highlighted enough.
Yeah, like Yuri Kochiyama, she was there when Malcolm X was assassinated. She held his dead body. I mean, they were friends. I mean, we know about it in our Asian community, the things across different communities and how we are in solidarity. But I think I agree with you, Julia. There is a long ways to go in our community to be in solidarity with other communities of color. There's a long ways to go even for the Asian community to show up for the Asian community. But I do see a lot of hope within the younger folks, including us. I think we are considered younger folks, but even younger folks, the Gen Zs, I know, kind of young. I want to pretend I'm still young, because Asians don't raisin.
I'm a very young what do they call a baby boomer? Yeah, I'm a young boomer.
Okay.
No, I'm
sorry. People are showing up and really speaking out and talking about BIPOC solidarity and protesting, writing letters, calling their senators and members of Congress for the Black community, for Indigenous communities, for Latinx, and for AAPI. So I am really excited about. I'm not on TikTok, but what's happening on TikTok that comes over to Instagram and how people are doing different messaging campaigns using these social media platforms that are so creative. And even I remember the BTS Army, they made a point to buy out a lot of tickets from the Trump presidential campaign voter rally, and it was a BTS Army. So, there's a correlation between K-pop and political organizing as well, which is really exciting. But sorry, I just kind of took your talking point and place of speaking. Pallavi, over to you for your thoughts on coalition building, racial solidarity, and I'd love for you to also kind of talk a little bit about the Ray Clay Democrats work too, because there's a lot there as well.
So with the coalition building, I think it's important for us to constantly remember that this is not an overnight thing. You have to put in the work, and you might not see the results for 10 years, but you still put in the work. And that's kind of the lesson we get from Stacey Abrams, right? Like, she was doing this back when no one knew who she was, no one was really giving her flowers, but she was still doing the work because now 2022 is happening and we're talking about her constantly. In terms of coalition building, yeah, I agree with everything you guys said, but I also think, sorry, my dog is, I have not given her attention in over an hour and she's not happy.
Aww. But we love you.
Yeah, we do love you. But I think part of it also goes to there is a reason why some of us show up to Black spaces and some of us don't. There is an anti-Blackness within the Asian community. There's an anti-Blackness. There's an anti-Hispanic sentiment within the Asian community. And until we can truly fix that, we're going to have trouble bringing our people over to Black Lives Matter. Because, like I said before, a lot of our parents, even a lot of our friends and people our generation, really subscribe to I went to college not because of affirmative action, but because I worked really hard. Not thinking about the fact that their parents were able to give them all these Kumon lessons and SAT prep classes that other people just simply don't have access to. And there is that mentality of we are where we are because we're hard workers. We are where we are because we value education and nobody else does. And I think internally we need to fix that, because until we do, we're not going to be able to get people who think that to a Black Lives Matter. It's just a sad reality of things. And for coalition building, I think it's important for us to talk individually to different communities, meet them where they are, like everything we've talked about before, and then look at, okay, what are the common factors that bring us together? Because the Republicans have figured out that public safety is a common factor that brings people together. And if they tell enough people that Democrats are going to take away cops and you're never going to be able to get through to anyone when you dial 911, that's reaching people. So we need to figure out what our common factor ties everybody together factor is. Now, in terms of, this is a really bad segue, Red Clay Democrats, I didn't found it. It was founded a while ago. I'm currently the chair.
Oh, sorry. I thought you founded it. It seems like something you would do.
So Red Clay Democrats is a PAC. It's a local PAC of young professionals. And our main job is to get some of these state house and state senate campaigns max out checks. So we do events that, it's for outreach, it's for voter education, but the point is to, get $10 from everybody coming to the door so that we can then turn that over to a few state house and state senate campaigns. I guess worldview is that we don't give to somebody is at that 48-49% mark, we will max out to that campaign to get them over to the 50% mark. Because there are a lot of state house and state senate campaigns that just don't get a lot of attention. I've worked on a few of those, and that one $2,000 check is sometimes the difference between getting out the last meal piece or the last social piece to do it. So if you live in Georgia, if you know people who live in Georgia, it's $35 to join for the entire year, and we do a lot of really cool events. And
yeah, I've been to it. Some of your
goes
events
into helping
us
flip seats.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I also want you to mention it because I saw how diverse that PAC was. It's all different types of people there, and everyone's young.
Yes, everyone's young. So we can actually talk about things that, instead of somebody else talking about what the young people want, we actually talk about, what is affecting us, and we're also young professionals. So we are in the workspace. So you can't tell us, you think this until you start paying taxes and then you won't be a Democrat anymore, because we are paying taxes and we are still Democrats.
Yes.
And we've done, mural events, we've done mural debates. So it's just, and I believe I'm the first Asian American chair of the PAC.
Okay.
And our vice chair is also Asian American. So it's definitely, there's a lot of diversity, and it's just a fun way to get involved. A lot of our events include campaigning because
fun. No, I love it.
But we raise the money and we, we hand it over to candidates, and that's just, we want to be helpful, but we also want to help.
Thank you. Okay, we are at almost time. I think we have about 120 seconds left. So 30 seconds each for just last thoughts as it relates to what is the big takeaway for courting the Asian American vote for the midterm election? Go, Julia. Oh, Eric.
Oh, I thought we were answering a different question. Sorry.
Oh, I'll go, Julia, if you want some seconds to think. I'll just say, we talked about earlier where one of the messages we got from voters was, "What have you done for us lately?" And we are happy to say that, the Biden-Harris administration, right, with the bipartisan infrastructure law, right, we are going to be building a better America. Right. And that's going to allow us to have better broadband, better transportation. These are, and, things, less lead and a safer environment. These are all issues that are very important to AAPI voters. And once we finally pass the Build Back Better initiative, we're going to see even more impacts on the API community, right? In terms of more money for and less expensive childcare and senior elder care, because a lot of us have multi-generational homes, and it's going to impact on how we help small businesses. And and again, we are the ones that stood by and stood up for the API community when Republicans were silent with the Trump's anti-Asian rhetoric. So now we just have to translate that into 20 languages and figure out how to disseminate that.
Asians in all 100 languages. That is one takeaway. Thank you, Eric. There's a lot of takeaways there. Julia.
Yes. Okay. So my one piece of advice is let's take a lesson from Stacey Abrams, right? And right now we're not all of us are in places where we've got an impending election coming up right away. So if you are in one of those areas, or even if you do have an election coming up very soon, take a lesson from Stacey Abrams, show up for your community, and also not only from your community in order to, keep that momentum strong, but show up for someone else's community and make sure that they can see that you are there for them too.
Yes. Show up for your community and for other people's communities. Pallavi.
My one piece of advice would be plan ahead. we know what kind of attacks are coming. Plan ahead to have a response. We know what kind of tactics are coming. Plan ahead so we're not caught off guard. When you're talking to people in the community who have great ideas and you think that person would be a good elected official 5 years down the line, put that bug in their head right now, so they can kind of start going into the spaces they need to not be green in 5 years when we know that this person would be a really good representative for our community. So whatever it is, whether it's elections, whether it's candidates, whether it's recruitment, just plan ahead.
Plan ahead. Plan. I mean, we are usually good at planning ahead. So let's just implement it into our political strategy for recording the Asian American vote, which you need to win your elections. All right. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to be with us. Thank you to Pallavi, Julia, and Eric. And we're excited that for Gain Power for hosting us and hosting an Asian American Pacific Islander vote specific panel. So thank you so much to all the organizers. Thank you to Tim Fan, who's been doing a lot of behind the scenes work for us and getting us together. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And we hope to see you virtually or in person in the midterm election cycle next year. So thank you and talk to you later.